We are back. It's the Joe Holka Show presented by Line Movement. You got to do things a little bit different with this video in week 4. Always want to make sure we're bringing you guys a little bit of everything on this show, whether it's season long, DFS, betting. Always going to bring you guys the best guests, of course. So in addition to the wide receiver sleeper segment with Matt Harmon that we've been doing every week, which we'll go to very shortly here, I'm going to give you guys my top 5 value plays on DraftKings for week 4. And if you enjoyed this bonus segment, please toss a like on this video. Consider subscribing to the channel and make sure you hit that notification bell so you don't miss anything along the way. I stream every Monday and Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern time, every Sunday a.m. at 9:30 Eastern time before kickoff. So I hope to see you guys there. Let's dive into today's video. Joining us, my good friend from Yahoo Sports. He is the Reception Perception creator. You guys know who I'm talking about. It's Matt Harmon. Matt, how was your week 3, my friend?
You know, it was good. Felt like I actually, for once, Joe, and this is not like me trying to take a victory lap or anything like that, but this is the first time that I can remember, and I say this deep into the season, and I really mean it. Like, you know, this is the first time, like 3 weeks into the season, I actually feel like pretty good about the majority of my teams, which, I mean, you know how it is, man. Like, we end up drafting so many squads that, you know, by the end of it, you just don't even know, like, you don't even know who's on your team, basically. It's such a crapshoot at that point. But this, I'm like, okay, I actually feel pretty good because got a lot of Tyler Lockett, you know, stuff like that. So there are definitely certain things that I feel really good about. You know, I feel good about my predictions about the Bills, stuff like that. So again, not trying to take a victory lap. It's just like kind of nice. Like, hey, man, like, I, you know, not even like my own predictions, just my actual fantasy teams, I feel like are doing pretty good.
I mean, victory laps are encouraged here, Matt. Anytime you want to take one of those, you go right ahead. I'll say this, like this, it's going into week 4 now. At least we have more than 1 or 2 weeks of a sample now. Like, I think that your Bills victory lap is definitely one that you can take. I've been taking those as well throughout this week. I think there's a lot of things to like about this part of the season because now we finally have a little bit of data to work with. I like to have a little bit of that as I'm trying to make some of my decisions in DFS for sure, just because you can get these guys at super low ownership that people will be kind of looking past. I think people now are finally starting to kind of move on from some of their summer takes. A couple that I'm holding on for dear life, Kenyon Drake, those type of things that I hope I'm not just going to move away from too soon. We just talked about that with Reeves earlier today in the matchup segment. But there's a couple things that, I mean, there's always going to be injuries. We know that. But the one guy, and I was excited to see him on your list this week because I think it's one that I still don't have a lot of clarity on. How do you feel about Emmanuel Sanders? Like, he was able to score last week. He's not really getting the volume that I thought he would with Michael Thomas out. I'm kind of questioning the ceiling overall. I'll say that. I get that this week it's against the Lions. It's kind of probably favor the run game a little bit. He just seems kind of touchdown dependent to me. Like, am I wrong?
No, I think, you know, he's a player that's kind of taken me by surprise too. I didn't really draft him on many teams or anything like that, but I loved the theoretical fit with him in this offense. And I think just so much about the Saints has been off of my expectations outside of Alvin Kamara. Like, I'm a longtime Kamara guy. Like, I got him up on the board here in the background.
That's his helmet, he was someone that right there.
Yeah, right. I mean, this was a guy that I thought would be the number one running back overall last year. Now he's having that season here in 2020 now that he's healthy, and probably even more so. I mean, he has 31 targets. The next most targeted running back is 23 with Zeke. I mean, that's a huge gap. He's one of the players that actually is 40% of the team's scrimmage yards. I mean, this has been pretty much Alvin Kamara, break a bunch of tackles or bust. That's been their offense so far. I think that's going to change a little bit when Thomas gets back. I also think Sanders is just kind of behind the 8 ball in terms of his communication with Breeze. But the reason I like this matchup and that play this much, as much as I do this week, is the fact that rookie cornerback Jeffrey Okudah for the Lions, who, you know, I think Sanders will line up across a decent amount. He's really struggled so far. Not so much just like he's been an awful player or anything like that, but he's really struggled with some of these high-end route runners like Devontae Adams, like DeAndre Hopkins last week. I mean, those at this point, coming off an injury for Okudah in the offseason, he's not really prepped to be that type of guy, the guy that I think the Lions and most people expect him to be. And Sanders, you know, in reception perception has for a long time been one of these great separators, great route runners off the line of scrimmage. So I think that this could be the week that he sort of sees much more volume just because I think the matchup is favorable. And hey, look, like, he's a guy too that fits in really well with what Drew Brees can do at this point, which I think is mostly a very condensed area of the field. So I like Sanders this week as a guy that I think most people are probably off of because he's not really been that impressive so far. I mean, his kind of ghosting during the Las Vegas game was a real disappointment to me. So yeah, he's definitely somebody that I think for an affordable price right now looks pretty good.
Yeah, 4,800 on DraftKings. That was going to be my next question, Matt, was how did he perform after that Achilles injury last year in reception perception? Was he someone that, like, I mean, that's an injury we don't usually see people come back from and be as dominant as they were before, right?
I like that you almost gave yourself the plug there with rushing expectations.
Yeah, literally. Like I haven't done any of that this year, and it's still on my brain for some reason. Anyways.
Hey, man, it's all good. No, look, Sanders is someone that I thought was a surprise because I agree with you. Like, we don't typically see guys come off those Achilles injuries. We don't see someone come off and be that impressive, even from like a box score standpoint. And even before he got traded to the San Francisco 49ers, like he was playing all right with the Denver Broncos. And I was especially encouraged to see him come back. You know, in 2016, his most recently like full logged season for reception perception, Sanders was at 73.6% success rate versus man coverage. Then this past season, he was back up to 76%. So I really like seeing that. You know, he's a guy that's over that 80th percentile range where you're typically going to see very productive players. So yeah, he's definitely somebody that I think is still, you know, based on last year's film, you know, this year it's a little bit different, but based on last year's film, he looked really good as a guy that came back, not just because, hey, look, he might have lost some of his steps physically, but as a route runner and as a technician, it's all still there. And we saw what a positive impact he had with the 49ers as well.
I like that. A cheap, I guess, guy to pair with Kamara if you are going to go that route this week. I guess we've had... I say this as I've like started to do a little bit more season-long stuff. I get a lot of start-sits. I'm sure you're just flooded with those. But the one guy that keeps coming up is Hunter Renfro this week. So he's a top 20 yards per route run guy so far this season. He's only 4,600 on DraftKings. Sounds like he's the guy that you're on this week. Tell us why.
Well, number one, I think the Raiders, one thing we saw last week was that they sort of need secondary players to step up. You know, it's one thing to have a great running back in Josh Jacobs. It's one thing to have an awesome tight end in Darren Waller that Bill Belichick thinks so highly of that he really apparently spent a lot of resources to lock down. Renfro was the only guy who was productive in that game outside, you know, when those two guys were sort of falling to the wayside. And that's pretty huge because I think the Raiders need someone else to step up. You know, they've lost Tyrell Williams to IR. Henry Ruggs is uncertain this week. Brian Edwards, another rookie that they really like and a player that I like as well, is also hurt. So I think Renfro lines up to see a lot of volume. And we know playing the Bills right now at this point is advantageous for the opposing offense, number one, because their offense in Buffalo is so damn good that their other teams are going to be trailing them. And not to mention, I think the defense so far has been one of the most kind of, you know, quietly underperforming units. They're really poor as a rush defense from a success rate standpoint, but even as a pass coverage unit, you know, Tre'Davious White is still one of the best corners in the NFL, but they need some other players to step up. They haven't had a great pass rush so far. So I think Renfro makes a ton of sense because he just fits so well with what Derek Carr likes to do. I mean, if you look at Hunter Renfro's rookie year reception perception, he has an above average success rate on just a handful of routes: the curl, the slant, the flat, and the screen. Mike Wright, who obviously I did reception perception for the fantasy footballers this past year, you know, he tweeted out the route chart and just said, Siri, show me a slot receiver. Yeah. I mean, Renfro fits just perfectly in that mold. So anytime I think you can get sort of a more condensed target tree for the Raiders, and that's what we're looking at with all of these injuries, that's a time I think you can look to Renfro because he's never going to be a guy that's going to command a ton of volume when everyone's healthy. But if he does get that volume, I think he has the skills to be productive.
84 yards and a touchdown last week. I think the Patriots just kind of sold out to stop Darren Waller, and Renfro was just kind of there all alone for most of those targets that he got. So I'm with you on that, especially if Henry Ruggs does end up being out. Looks like he's questionable right now. Edwards out for sure. So yeah, with an expanded role, I think these slot receiver guys are ones that I struggle with because I don't know if there's like a true ceiling there, but he's at a price point where I still think that he makes a ton of sense for DFS. This next one is one that I'm going to need some talking into, Matt, because I think this everyone wants to talk about Fitzpatrick. He's too cheap on DraftKings, all those things, but who are we pairing with him, I think is the biggest conversation to have. Preston Williams is someone that I wasn't on last week in Showdown, so that didn't go so well. But like, November ACL tear for this guy, I think that it's a little bit scary. He's caught just 5 of his 14 targets this year. Parker obviously has that hamstring injury, but he's played 88% and 92% of the snaps over the last 2 games. Parker's still leading Miami in air yard market share, 25%. I think it's a great spot for Gesicki. I would have said that Preston Williams is like maybe my 3rd, 4th option this week with Fitzpatrick, but it sounds like you're on him. So let's hear why.
Oh, I agree. Look, for one, I mean, this is pretty much like Renfro and even Preston Williams are pretty much just how can I save some cash to get up for these Seahawks guys? Because I think they're in such a great spot.
Matt. I love it. You're bringing us sleepers. It's great.
Exactly. And it makes sense too, because obviously you can run it back if you're stacking Russ and Lockett and DK, which I pretty much want to do every week. This is a good way to do it, run it back with a cheaper guy like Preston Williams. And I agree, like this is encouraging for Devontae Parker too, because he's coming off the injury report this week too. He's officially practicing and not officially hurt any longer. So that's great news, because I think Parker has looked, a step slower than he usually would be. And I don't even this is a guy too that I don't really love the player. I think it was nice to see Preston Williams line up and play X receiver on 94.6% of his snaps as a rookie, showing you that he can be, that type of guy that you can trust on the outside. And really whenever Tua takes over, I'm probably going to be completely out on Preston Williams, because I think he's like Devontae Parker, but to the extreme, where I don't think either of these guys are great separators, but they're great in 50-50 ball contested situations. And I think that this is just such a great spot too for the matchup, not just because, again, they're going to be trailing. The Miami Dolphins will be trailing, obviously, Seattle, but the Seattle Seahawks have allowed 400 more receiving yards to wide receivers than any other team in the NFL. I don't really care about that from an NFL perspective. That doesn't make a difference to me at all when projecting the Seahawks to win a bunch of games. I think they're, the favorite to represent the NFC right now in the Super Bowl. I thought that the second we saw the play calling in week 1, this is just the type of season that they're going to have. I don't care about the defense being weak from that point, but for fantasy, it's great because it does allow those run back situations with a guy like Preston Williams, who's very affordable. And again, he's going to help you get up to guys like Alvin Kamara or guys like the Seattle passing game. I think it's just sort of a sneaky spot for him to potentially get a couple of big grabs. He's always going to be that type of volatile player, but this looks like the time, this spot particularly, to use a volatile guy like Williams.
Yeah, I'll even take it a step further with this matchup against Seattle. They're just a team that doesn't really care to pressure a ton. So if we got Fitzpatrick back there and maybe he's not scrambling for his life, just throwing a bunch of YOLO balls, maybe he just throws those YOLO balls and actually has a little bit more time this week for these guys to get downfield. So that would definitely play to the skill set of guys like Preston Williams, to the guys like Devontae Parker. The one, thing that I was going to say, and I'll say this, is I'm a pretty big Gesicki fan overall. He's leading this team in targets and air yards so far this year at 31%. Fitzpatrick, he's going to have to throw because of game script. We pretty much know that. So I like the ceiling for Gesicki because that Seattle is actually without their strong safety, Jamal Adams. So that was kind of why I was going that direction. But I like the idea of getting another one of these pass catchers. Maybe I'll just play them all. Who knows? He's going to be throwing the entire game. So I think it makes a ton of sense.
This game environment is just so juicy, man. And I said coming into the year that Gesicki was my favorite of the Dolphins guys. I don't care about Parker. I don't care about Williams, because I think, again, I love Fitzpatrick, man. I want him to play as long as possible. But I think we know at some point, either they're just going to want to take a look at the rookie quarterback, or we know the deal with Fitzpatrick. He throws you into a lot of fun games, but he can throw you out of games as well. He may throw himself out of this job when the schedule starts to tighten up a bit, which is not right now. Again, playing Seattle, that's not going to happen this week. I think Gesicki's my favorite of the bunch to still remain productive with Tua, because I think he's the best separator of the bunch, gets the targets that you want to see over the middle of the field for a passer like Tua, as opposed to Fitzpatrick, who's totally comfortable rifling it in to, covered situations, contested spots. I love Gesicki. I think he'll be my favorite play pretty much every single week. There's not going to be a lot of weeks when I want to play Preston Williams. This is one of those weeks, and it's, one of the few, as I said.
Love it. I'll say this. It's early in the week right now, and last week I basically talked myself out of, some of the quote-unquote best plays and just got absolutely buried when the chalk went crazy. So maybe, I don't know, it is early. Maybe I talked myself out of Fitzpatrick and all these great plays, and they just go crazy. So I would imagine everyone here is going to listen to you, and they're going to be long on this game overall. I think the game environment Very strong. So Matt Harmon, everyone, Yahoo Sports. Definitely follow him on Twitter, Matt Harmon _BYB. Good times, man. I'll see you next week.
Appreciate you, Joe. Thanks a ton.
Always fun talking football with Matt Harmon. Again, the wide receiver position, just so important, whether it's season long, DFS, whatever it is. But it is week 4. I promised you guys a bonus segment. We're going to go through my top 5 value plays on DraftKings, and we're going to start on this free resource at linemovement.com. This is our NFL data table. So you go to the resources tab up top, NFL data table, basically a breakdown of each position, what I think really matters at each of these. There's some advanced metrics in here that really are predictive of fantasy scoring, not just basically a bunch of information that's going to be more descriptive, maybe confuse you overall. We're trying to keep things simple. We're trying to bring value, and it's all free. So make sure you check this out over at linemovement.com. We'll have some ownership projections in here shortly. So again, my top 5 value plays. I think it makes sense to start at the quarterback position this week. So let's talk a little bit about Ryan Fitzpatrick. Yes, I think it might be Fitzpatrick week. I think it might be Fitzmagic week, whatever you want to call it. I've definitely been on record of playing this guy quite a bit. I just think he shapes up really well for fantasy overall. He's someone that at 5,400, guys, it's just a totally different pricing tier than some of these other guys in this range. So are we rolling out Kirk Cousins at 5,600? Are we rolling out Derek Carr at 5,300? Daniel Jones, Dwayne Haskins? I don't know. I prefer Ryan Fitzpatrick in this game against Seattle. The one thing that I love about Fitzpatrick is he's not going to be an absolute zero for us on the ground. We talk a lot about just the rushing upside, but also the floor from these type of players overall. So Fitzpatrick, Seattle is basically one of the best matchups you could have on the other side of this game. There's a couple of reasons why. So Seattle is actually forcing opponents to throw at a league high clip of 51.7 attempts per game. So that just means that quarterbacks are going to be dropping back a ton, and obviously they're going to be most likely in poor game script with how well this Seattle team is putting up points. Let Russ cook. Sure, if you want to pay all the way up for Russ on the other side of it, fine, 7,800. But again, guys, the opportunity cost at quarterback, I think it makes sense to start your morning or start your day whenever you're building your lineups with a cheap quarterback and see if you can upgrade from there. So I think Ryan Fitzpatrick is my guy. One of the things that I really want to focus on at the quarterback position is efficiency. And one is the one thing that can really limit efficiency. We know this, right? It's pressure. So I think that this matchup against Seattle, it shapes up even better from that perspective as well. So enemy quarterbacks also, they're just basically they have more time than normal. I'll say that. So they are a bottom 5 team in sack rate at just 3.1%. So the Seahawks, they're content to kind of sit back a little bit. So Ryan Fitzpatrick isn't going to be under as much siege as he normally is. There's some cheap options to go to if you want to check out different ways to stack him. Definitely check out the stacks video on my channel that went up yesterday. But I'll say this. The next position that I want to talk about is going to be the running back position. This is not a position that I typically pay down for overall, but I'm always willing to say when I'm wrong. And I think that I was wrong last week. I kind of threw a little bit of shade on the Mike Davis play overall. And I'm going to talk a little bit why I think that might have been a mistake. So my number 2 value play of the week is going to be Mike Davis at 5,700 in this Arizona and Carolina game. So what I didn't see coming from Mike Davis in this spot is I didn't think that he would be as active in the passing game. And I was just straight wrong. So basically last week, 13 carries for 46 yards. He also had 8 catches for 45 yards and a touchdown, but 9 targets, guys. He now has 16 catches for 119 yards on 17 targets over the past 2 games. So I was wrong. We'll say this. If I just literally sort by projected receptions, only Alvin Kamara and Ezekiel Elliott are projecting for more catches. So on a site like DraftKings, that's kind of a necessity, in my opinion. So 5,700 for Mike Davis, I think he's just underpriced. If he gets anywhere near 20 to 22 touches, I think he's in a smash spot and a pace-up game against Arizona, which we will talk about a little bit more shortly. But guys, Davis handled 65% of the rushing attempts last week. Curtis Samuel, there was talk that he might come in and take a little bit of that load off of kind of the CMC role that I don't think anyone was just going to step into 100% of that. But Curtis Samuel only had 20% of the rushing work. So basically, Davis, 71% of the routes that he ran. I mean, it's just crazy that he was able to kind of garner a 33% target share in this offense. I definitely didn't see that coming. I'm playing him over guys like Joe Mixon, who I know has been a hot topic of conversation this week in general. So my number 3 value play, let's just stay in this game. And I'll say this, guys, value plays can be a lot of different things. They can be very cheap, thin options that allow you to do different things in roster construction. But this week, I think there's enough ways to save, like we talked about Fitzpatrick before, that we should be targeting a couple guys that are just underpriced. Like the price is like wrong, basically. DJ Moore, 5,600. He's my number 3 value play on the week. He does own a 50% share of the team air yards through the rest of the beginning of the season, which is pretty crazy. 25% of the target share there. He just hasn't scored a touchdown, guys. So that's what you'll see a lot of times as we're looking at some of these numbers and diving into the data a little bit. A lot of times you'll see these guys that have great target shares, great volume, but they're underpriced on DraftKings basically because they haven't scored a touchdown. So 5,600 for a weighted opportunity rating of 0.8. Guys, I talk a lot about weighted opportunity rating. If this is your first time watching my content, it's basically a mixture of a target share of air yards and market share of targets. So it's a Josh Hermsmeyer air yards stat that is just absolutely fantastic. One of the most predictive metrics there is. So if you're just blindly picking wide receivers, I always start with weighted opportunity rating. We'll see these guys that are drastically underpriced. So DJ Moore, 5,600. I don't think we really have to say a ton more about it. Obviously, we like this fast-paced game against Arizona. I think the price is just wrong, basically. He's down 1K on DraftKings since week 1 in terms of his salary, so definitely going back to the DJ Moore well. I like this game overall for points. So my 4th value play, I want to talk a little bit about another game that I really like. Brandon Cooks, Houston Texans. I like this Houston team overall this week. We've talked about that throughout a bunch of the videos that have gone out so far. Again, if you're joining us for the first time, definitely come hang out with us live on Mondays and Wednesdays at 3 p.m. Eastern time right here on YouTube. If you're watching this on the podcast later, would love it if you would leave us a rating and review. It really does do a lot in terms of getting this in front of more eyes. But Brandon Cooks, guys, 4,500. I just think that he is too cheap. So we know that he kind of has gotten off to a little bit of a rough start, right? He had that quad injury he was kind of battling through. There's been some really tough matchups. We talked a little bit about that with Reeves earlier this week. But I do think that just the volume has been there. He does have a team high in air yards market share, 27%, a very solid 0.5 weighted opportunity rating, which I really love. 88% of Houston snaps. So I think that he's a guy, he's a speedy wide receiver. He's someone that I think could be breaking some really big plays and just hasn't quite gotten there yet. I think that he's someone that we should be on this week, especially at 4,500, guys. I just think he's underpriced. There's a couple other reasons I like him in this game. I think that there's an argument to be said for these guys that are going to be moving down the field a little bit further. There's got to be time. There's got to be time for your quarterback to have the protection for them to get downfield, right? So this is a spot where Houston doesn't have a very good offensive line. So normally Deshaun Watson is running for his life in a lot of ways for this type of thing. But the Vikings are one of the worst sack rates in the entire league, 2.8% sack rate. We know that Danielle Hunter is on the IR. Minnesota just isn't bringing a ton of pressure overall. So that's going to be pretty nice change for Deshaun Watson. So I think that there's a chance that Cooks does get a little bit more involved this week. He's actually been moved around a little bit more. He's been playing a little bit in the slot as well, which is something that I kind of like to see. Maybe they get him some more layup targets where he can get to do a lot after the catch. So I'm interested in that. I will say this, Minnesota actually ran a ton of plays last week also. 62 offensive plays. Kirk Cousins actually kind of let it air out a little bit, which is nice. So I think that on the other side of this game, Houston doesn't pressure a ton either. So maybe both teams have the ability to kind of score points a little bit. We need to think about that at wide receiver, right? Game script's very important. So we need Minnesota to put up some points for Cooks to really hit his ceiling here. And I think he will. The last player, and I actually kind of went back and forth a little bit. So my 5th value play option here is probably not who you're thinking it's going to be. Anyone? It is in this same game. Jordan Akins, 3,300. The 6th most routes per game on this entire slate. So he's around guys like Darren Waller, Eric Ebron, Hunter Henry. Logan Thomas was almost my guy here. I'll say that. I think my biggest issues with Logan Thomas are kind of that the usage is there, but the team total is always going to be low because he plays for Washington. And the catchable targets from Haskins are never going to be very solid. So we talk about this a lot on stream, but one thing that is really important to me is a high team total, because we know that there's going to be less volume at the tight end position overall. We need touchdowns to really hit our ceiling and kind of hit value in some ways from this perspective. So I do like Logan Thomas. I think that the volume is there. the routes run, all of that stuff is there. But if I had to pick one guy, I think I just would rather have more access to this Houston and Minnesota game. So Jordan Akins at 3,300, I think that he'll still be relatively popular, but maybe not as popular as someone like Logan Thomas at the same price. But I think I prefer the game environment overall. I think, like I said, I think it could go back and forth a little bit. The spread here from blitzbet.eu is only minus 3.5 points. So I think this will go back and forth a bit. But guys, 29 implied team total. That's huge for the tight end position. He's running routes, all of those things. Maybe not deep routes like some of these other guys we'll see that run more wide receiver-esque type of routes like Gesicki, like Hunter Henry, like Tyler Higbee, that sort of thing. But I think at the price, still makes a ton of sense to go to a guy like Akins and get more access to this passing game in Houston in a fantastic spot.